Hello, everybody. This is Die for Valhalla. Die for Valhalla is a brawler that has been released very recently, and I've seen it compared to Rampage Knights, which was also a brawler. Now, Rampage Knights was actually a roguelite brawler, which was pretty cool at the time because that was one of the earlier examples I'd seen of a roguelite label actually being applied to something else than, one of a straight kind of RPG-esque game. So it was neat to see the brawler kind of getting that treatment, and it did it really well. However, Die for Valhalla is not a roguelite per se. It's not really in that label. It does have a roguelite mode that you can enable to play it more in that style, but its mechanics don't really fit that exactly. Now, in this footage, I'm not actually playing it in that mode, but I'll go over what that actually entails if you do choose to do so. The roguelite mode makes it harder. First of all, it ups the difficulty. It also shortens the campaign because it adds permadeath, naturally. So basically it compresses the gameplay experience to make it more difficult, just sort of more hectic, and just sort of compresses the difficulty curve so things get tougher quicker and the world is smaller to actually accommodate all of this difficulty increase and everything getting, just being steeper. So it all makes sense for it to be a bit shorter as a result. The world is actually quite large. You go from node to node and occasionally change scenery as well, which we'll go into. And all of this is just done faster because everything is just at a higher pace due to the increased difficulty and everything. And also there are random potion drops that you can get occasionally in this game. Everything is consumed as soon as you touch it. You don't have an inventory or anything in this game. It's very classic brawler style, kind of simplified, no inventory, anything like that. And in the standard mode that I'm playing right now, everything is at a slower difficulty curve. It gets just as difficult, but it takes a bit more time because there are more levels to get through in the same span. And the potions you get are always beneficial at the end. Usually they drop from bosses and occasionally at the end of levels during this sort of loot explosion that happens. And they're always beneficial effects. However, in the roguelite modes, sometimes they have negative effects instead. And it's very much the roguelike mechanic of you have to memorize what color of potions do what, because there are no labels, they don't say. So in each playthrough, every color of potion will have a specific effect tied to it, and you must learn what effect they carry by, drinking them, basically, and seeing what happens. But this brings me to one of my first major gripes with the game, in that you actually don't have a way to sort of take stock of everything that you actually have on your character at any given time. The game is actually sort of very stingy with its information. It's not very transparent with what you have, if that makes sense. I would sort of like a way to just take stock of everything that your character possesses currently, because everything that your current Viking actually has in terms of upgrades and passive effects and potions and pets. There are familiars that you can obtain at the end of levels that they drop as loot in that loot storm that I was talking about. There are all sorts of things. All of this is information that would be nice to understand what it actually does. However, there's no real way to find out without experimentation, and some of it is actually kind of difficult to understand what it all does. It'd be nice because there are several different classes of Vikings, and different ones have different sort of basic combos with light and heavy attacks and things like that. It'd be nice to have a sort of just quick basic move list to look at as for what each one can do. It'd be nice to have a quick way, almost like an inventory screen, to see what each of your various potion effects that you currently have active do. It would be nice to be able to see what all of the familiars that you may have collected currently and have circling around your head actually do, because some of them don't really seem to do anything, but I'm sure it's just that I didn't notice what they were actually doing, as opposed to them actually doing nothing. However, there is unfortunately not actually a way to tell what they all do without just paying extra attention to what each individual part of the screen they occupy are actually doing in a very large fight that can be quite difficult. I suppose that's really my main problem with the game, as opposed to any mechanical flaw, is simply that all of the information that would be really nice to actually know isn't presented to you in any way. No sort of encyclopedia or inventory screen or anything like that, and it would genuinely be quite nice to have something to that effect in the game to actually be able to look at to see everything that your character currently has access to. Because one thing this game does have, which is pretty unique for a brawler of any sort, is a possession system, because this character that I'm currently using right now isn't technically my character. What you actually are, that you're about to see, is a Valkyrie, a spirit that can possess things, and there I am. When your character dies, you actually revert to your Valkyrie form, because you can actually die many, many times in any given level. As long as your Valkyrie herself doesn't die, you can continue on and possess multiple things. You can actually possess just about any sort of entity on screen. You can possess inanimate objects like barrels and bushes and stuff like that. You can summon up various different classes of Viking from those gravestones. You can even go so far as to possess the enemies themselves if you have the correct skill for it. And that one works a bit different from the others, because unlike possessing objects or Vikings, the enemies actually require a specific skill that you have to learn from leveling up. And there are 3 different tiers of the skill: small, medium, and large enemies. They have to learn separately from each other. And enemies actually, unlike anything else, have a time limit when you're possessing them, because they sort of shake you off after a certain period of time. Like this, I'm actually possessing this giant frog right here. And after a certain period of time, you'll be kicked out. But it is fun and causes a bit of havoc, and even though the possession is temporary, the aggro that you build on other enemies by beating them up with their friend does not tend to wear off, and you can cause some chaos that way by causing the enemies to sort of start hating each other and create like a big brawl in the middle of the screen, which is pretty fun. You can even use that to go so far as to actually possess the bosses sometimes, depending on their size, which isn't actually that useful, because generally speaking, the only enemy in a boss battle is the boss, and you can't generally hurt the boss with itself, but it can be useful in really specific circumstances, like if the boss is one of those that summons a bunch of ads, for instance. You can use it to just like decimate those in a big wave. But it is really fun to just sort of mess around. And I suppose that this game has that going for it a lot. It is really fun to just mess around with the possession system, and that is a positive, if anything. Although I really do dislike these frog things, because they make a very annoying noise and can stun lock you repeatedly. Another kind of odd mechanic is that bar on the top left there is actually a kind of dual-purpose bar. That glory that you're collecting, those little orbs, is used for leveling up 2 different things at once. Your actual Valkyrie levels up from it, and those level ups are permanent and increase your stats in a way you'll see in a minute once I complete this mission. But it also increases that bar in the top left, which levels up your current Viking that you're possessing. And them dying basically resets that bar, and it, resets their level whenever you have to summon a new one, or the same one again once they've died. But once it fills up, it allows you to also unleash this sort of screen-clearing bomb, which you've seen a couple of times this mission, and is quite useful for just doing lots of damage to everything on screen and destroying a whole bunch of the scenery at once, which can spawn healing hearts and the like. But it's odd, because using that bomb kind of backs up that meter a bit, and I'm not sure if that actually levels your Viking down, or if leveling up your Viking actually has much of an effect on their strength, because your Valkyrie is the one with the stats, which I would assume has effects on the strength of whatever you're possessing, right? Again, this is a problem with you not having any sort of way to see any transparency with much of the statistical power of whatever you're possessing and things like that. That would be, all this confusion could be alleviated if there was some sort of inventory or encyclopedia screen to actually understand some of these mechanics a little bit better, I suppose. But yeah, these frogs can, like, go away. They're really annoying, and I absolutely hate them. But other than that, I'm actually not a huge fan of brawlers, I should probably say. I really did enjoy Rampage Nights, because it did something really, really different. It had some excellent combat that felt really, really chunky and added in those... I mean, you know, you could like just throw dudes across the screen. It was really cool. And it added in those roguelite mechanics that gave you a really interesting sense of progression throughout any individual run with lots of different items and things and some pretty cool weapons. And although this game doesn't have that, I would say that it's hard for me to judge exactly how good of a brawler it is, because like I said, I don't really like brawlers that much most of the time unless they do something exceptional. I would say that because of its combat system being somewhat simplistic, I don't necessarily think it is an exceptional brawler, but I do think it is a good one. And there's that loot shower, because it does have some pretty interesting mechanics. That possession thing is really cool, and I think this is one of those brawlers that is probably best enjoyed with friends because of how much of a chaotic mess it would become. And I think this one is best when there's a ton of stuff on screen and there's just so much happening with so many enemies and a lot of just sort of craziness going on with lots of different things sort of coming together with your skills and stuff like that, which I'm about to show you here, that it just becomes more interesting, and I'll actually show you that at the beginning of the next level as well. So you have lots of passive skills that your Valkyrie can learn every time they level up, and you always have an assortment of random skills to pick from, dependent on what else you have chosen, because different skills unlock another skill in a sort of like tree, kind of an invisible tree sort of basis, and these are the ones that I can currently pick from, as well as the ones that I've already chosen. And there are lots of different things. Some of them are really quite interesting, like I have one that strikes enemies with lightning every certain number of attacks that I land and things like that. And some of them work better with other people playing with you as well. And I'm going to actually choose the one that heals me every time I pick up glory, because that seems useful for a solo player. And there's also this, which is a way to improve your Valkyrie's stats, and presumably the stats of everything you possess. You have to go in a kind of linear fashion to try and select a certain number of runes to improve the particular stat they represent. You augment it by 10 every rune. So that's how that works. And there are a couple other ways to raise those. You also have this clan system. So there are several clans you can unlock. You don't start with all of them like this, with all of them available to choose. But I'm currently using the clan of the dragon, and each clan has a different sort of specialization. You know, some of them, like this one, regenerate stamina much more quickly, which is useful for dodging and blocking and the like. Some of them have other stuff like dual potions or really, really heavily increased health pools and things like that. And they also, as you can see, have different combinations of 3 Viking classes. There are actually several different Viking classes, but each of those clans have 3 different ones of the, I think, 7 possible classes that they can find those tombstones of to summon. And that's pretty cool because that adds some more variety to the game, allowing you to choose a sort of specialization, almost like a meta class or an overarching kind of theme for your Vikings. And I really liked the Clan of the Dragon because I found that being able to do more damage against things that are already taking damage over time makes me really powerful. As you're about to see, a lot of the enemies I had trouble with in the last level, I'm now going to be able to absolutely destroy because I poison on attack, which means I'm also going to suddenly double the damage that I do, and then some, on poison. So basically, some of the enemies that I took a long time to kill in the last area, I'm now going to destroy very, very quickly. And that's when the game sort of comes together to be very enjoyable, because all of your sort of passives and various build-defining abilities suddenly activate. And I have a feeling that because of this, playing it with a friend and sort of screwing around and maybe occasionally killing each other on accident would actually be a lot of fun. And I suppose that's probably why the Roguelite mode might also be an interesting idea, because these sort of builds would come together much more quickly due to the compressed nature of the overall kind of difficulty and world being smaller, and you coming across all this quicker and probably gaining glory and levels quicker and things like that as well. So yeah, that's why I think it's probably still quite a good brawler, if not necessarily an absolutely exceptional one. But again, I don't necessarily have the judgmental skills when it comes to brawlers as much as I do for other games, because I just don't play a huge amount of them, because it's not a genre that I am always into. One thing that I will say this does have that is extremely important in Brawlers, though, is enemy variety. I found that a lot of people, even people that like Brawlers much more than me and have, more experience in judging them, that we both agree with is, even if the game doesn't have a huge amount of variety in how you deal with enemies in terms of your moveset and things like that, it needs to have a lot of variety in things for you to deal with. And this game definitely has that. It has a huge amount of enemy variety, a ton of really well-designed and interesting looking and actually interestingly performing enemies. Like that weird Dagon Worshipper thing right there. There are lots of enemies in this game, and there are actually lots of places to fight the enemies as well. You'll be going around different realms with different themes. This is obviously some sort of like mushroom realm that I'm in right now. I've been through volcanoes and forests and caves and lots of differently themed realms with a different background interactable objects, which is important not only because they each have their different uses, like explosive barrels and things like that, but also because, of course, you can possess things. You have to remember. So different objects that you can actually interact with and possess means that that adds to the variety as well. You can smack an explosive barrel to make it explode, but in this game you also happen to be able to go out of your body and possess the explosive barrel, hop it over to a group of enemies and use it to set them all on fire and then detonate it. That is something you can actually do. So those background objects have extra value and extra use in this game because of that possession mechanic, which is nice. And of course, if you're playing with a friend, you can also use it to, hop the barrel into their, arrow shot and line up a big explosion or something, which is neat. But the enemy variety is probably one of my favorite parts of the game, actually, because I think it's got quite a genuinely nice art style. It reminds me of something that I can't really remember exactly what. I'm thinking, later Newgrounds animations and things with that kind of puppet animation is sort of what it reminds me of. It's genuinely pretty neat, actually. It looks kind of great. It's very colorful. I definitely enjoy the color contrast between your Vikings and the enemies. It makes everything look... It keeps your attention, and even in the chaotic battles, you never really get confused about where you are, which I think is important for a brawler. And something I've had problems with in some brawlers in the past, honestly. I don't really have that problem here. And some of the enemies get really hard to deal with, but most of them I find pretty well designed, and that I mean, even though some of them are difficult, I don't find them frustrating, we're about to see a pretty difficult to deal with enemy right here that is a poison version of those weird sort of Cthulhu floating enemies. But they're a little bit farther on this level, and they're pretty challenging to deal with at some stages, but they're not unfair or obnoxious. They're just hard and require a little bit of strategy, and I think that's probably one of the more important parts of a good brawler, is to have enemies that require different strategies to deal with, so you're not just going through the game mashing buttons until everything dies, moving on to the next level, and repeating until you win. Because a brawler where you can do that is boring. And this is not that. So probably another important focus is the fact that this game is not expensive at all, and for what it offers, which is quite a long campaign with quite a varied set of locations and things to destroy with your friends, well, it's good value for that. It's about $12. $12 seems like a pretty fair price, honestly. And right now, at the time of putting this out, the 25th of June, for reference, although with YouTube being how it is, it might actually not go out quite until midnight or so, we'll see. Anyway, around that time, it is actually available for a little bit less than that even. It's currently on sale for the summer sale and all those activities going on, so I think you can get it for about $8 or $9. You can pick it up. So if you do have someone that wants to, enjoy some brawler action with you, or you just want to play a sort of classic style brawler with a couple of the modern trappings and a optional roguelite mode and all that stuff yourself, that's a really pretty good price for that sort of thing. Honestly, I think it's got enough variety and enough of a draw for that style of gameplay and that style of suiting its sort of, classic roots and all that for a brawler to fit that sort of audience, I feel. And even though that's not exactly my thing, and I would prefer, personally, something with, a ton more moveset variety and things like that, that's just how I like that style of game, I guess, because I'm not really into brawlers all that much. I think that what this does, it does very well. And for its price, I mean, it's hard to argue with, really. So that is Die for Valhalla. I think that it should get, hopefully, a pretty good reception, and I want to see what else these guys can do in terms of, you know, what they're going to try for next. I think that the Rampage Knights crowd, because I've seen this, you know, compared so much to that, will find something to like in this. Even though it's not actually all that similar mechanically, it's clear that the comparisons are being made for a reason, and they're valid, I would say. You know, as far as roguelite brawlers and stuff like that, I understand why that's being made. But yeah, so Die for Valhalla. The links will of course be in their usual places in the description below if you want to check this out. A fairly cheap and cheerful game that I think has its place in the kind of indie brawler scene, and let's be honest, we don't actually get a lot of those, so it's nice to see very competent ones actually being made. And the whole possession mechanic, I think, is something very interesting. I love the ability to take control of things in games and actually plays enemies and things like that. Any game that lets me do that, it always gets my attention, so I was definitely excited to try that out. And it does actually help to flesh out the variety as well, just being able to temporarily do whatever you want with basically anything on screen. Always a plus. So yeah, thank you very much for watching. If you have any questions, comments, feel free to let those go below. And I'll see you guys next time.